On this episode of Take This Down, I sit down with Jennifer Trevino, Executive Director of Leadership Fort Worth. We talk about her upbringing growing up in Joshua, Texas, to her days at Texas Tech, to ultimately what propelled her to community activism, which led her to her role today. You're going to want to take this down. You're going to want to take this down. Well, Jennifer, thank you for joining me on Take This Down. It's always good to have a friend, or at least I consider you a friend. I hope it's the same. But thank you for being willing to sit down and have a conversation with me.
Absolutely, Ty. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
All right. Well, you know, it's a tradition of mine. And if you've seen the show or watched an episode, I always like to tell my guests why I invited them on the show. You know, I know we kind of offline, I told you that, you know, our first time we met was on our time in service with the Race and Culture Task Force, which I'm sure we'll talk about later. But, you know, I got to follow you and just see, you know, not only what you were doing in the community, but what you have done leading up to that. You know, me being an attorney, I always research who I'm going to be working with. And, you know, I loved everything I saw, loved everything I read, and just continue to follow you in your endeavors and how you've progressed along, not only professionally, but what you've done in the community. I was like, I have to have you here. And so we're here. So thank you.
Well, thank you. That's so nice of you to say. And, you know, I enjoyed working together with you as well in the task force, even though it was not necessarily an easy project that we were working on.
Right. So just to kind of get right into it, Jennifer Trevino, you know, who is Jennifer Trevino?
Oh, gosh. That's a loaded question, right?
Of course.
So lots of different hats and titles and things, you know, besides being a dog mom and a wife, daughter, sister-in-law, hopefully best friend, and, you know, good neighbor, but also someone who has always tried to make a difference. So, you know, growing up as a kid, we talked about business at the table, dinner table, family dinners. My parents both worked in the family business that was owned by my mom's uncles. So that I grew up with that. We didn't talk politics. We didn't talk, you know, other things, but that was business was always. So I always knew I wanted to go into business. And so that's what sparked kind of that background for me. I knew I could do a lot of different things with it, and then followed. I had a friend of mine who was a year older than me in Joshua High School, where I graduated, small town. So, you know, valedictorian of a class of, I think, 157, something like that.
Well, at least there's 156 kids you knew you were
Exactly. Worked harder, you know, GPA, all that kind of stuff. But so she went out to Texas Tech, and then I went to visit when I was a senior and loved it. I loved how Lubbock was, you know, small town, but college town and big enough and far enough away, but still could get home on the weekends. So I wanted that full college experience. Gotcha. So that's what kind of contributed there. But, you know, knowing that business would take me in a bunch of different directions, and I really enjoyed the management courses I was taking as electives, so I added that as a double major to the marketing degree that I earned, and then made my way back to the Metroplex and have been bouncing around ever since. But then when I met my husband back in 2001, blind date, by the way, introduced by family cousin of mine and her husband, and we hit it off. And so I went back to school and pivoted to get on the corporate side. So like a lot of folks here in Fort Worth, I have a stint with Radio Shack in the marketing department, and, you know, used that TCU MBA to pivot. But I think, you know, for me, I've always been somebody that wanted to do good things, do well at whatever my job was and everything. And I think for me, when I was at Radio Shack, that's when I figured out too that something was kind of missing. And I'd started volunteering after my MBA program at TCU, so with the Hispanic Women's Network and others. So that's what sparked kind of this give back, be part of the community. And then going through Leadership Fort Worth while I was at the Health Science Center, they supported my participation in the program. You know, I think back to 2009 when I graduated, that program is what planted so many seeds of why I'm doing what I'm doing now.
Gotcha.
And even made that pivot into nonprofit leadership.
Okay. I don't want to get there, but I want to go back a little bit.
Yeah.
Joshua, Texas. That's where you grew up.
Yeah.
So Joshua, for those who may not know, what we say roughly 30 minutes southwest from Fort Worth.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you grew up in a biracial family.
Yes.
How was growing up in a biracial family in Joshua, Texas?
You can imagine, I bet. So this was early 90s, late 80s when my family moved out there. Originally, we were living in Arlington for about a year. My parents wanted a little land, a little slower pace of life. They looked at the school I was going to go to in high school and thought, that's not exactly what we want. So then we went out to, I felt like the other extreme. From, elementary school where it was like cul-de-sac, suburbia, to, Joshua. And so, back then, late 80s, early 90s, my family didn't look like any other family in town. I remember us going to our first football game as a family and people in the stands turning and looking, and I didn't really understand why quite then. But then, of course, it kicked in by high school and kind of had a little bit of an identity crisis. Just from the standpoint of well, what am I? Not knowing that my parents had done a really good job of infusing our culture and family traditions and all those kinds of things, but not overly saying, okay, well, this is on the black side of your family, or this is on the Hispanic.
Right.
It just was part of the day to day. We also had my grandmother, so my dad's mother, who lived with us from the time I was 3. And so my younger brother doesn't know any different either, grew up with us, helped take care of us. My parents were working. But she was also that Depression era kid. So there was a lot of those values that really pushed into us as kids as well. And so, I think she did a lot, and my parents did too, without explicitly saying, because you're a woman of color, you're going to have to work harder, all that. But they just instilled good work ethic in us and said, nobody's going to hand you things.
Right. So it seems like it was foundational for you, but you just didn't know at that particular time why it was the foundation. Yeah. And so, growing up, being biracial in Joshua, Texas, did you ever feel like you didn't fit in or that you were different?
Oh, yeah. All the time.
Because kids were nice,
Well, and my grandmother used to say things like, you can't argue with ignorance.
Right.
And I truly was.
Can you repeat that one more time? You cannot argue with ignorance.
You cannot argue with ignorance.
I love that.
I have to remind myself sometimes, when I think, what would Grandma say? But it's true because in many ways, too, I was the first person like me that they were dealing with.
Right.
So as you can imagine, it was predominantly white, very much more rural than it is now because Burleson hadn't grown, the toll road hadn't come towards Cleburne and all that. So that area was still very rural. And just so the small town thinking, so the fact that we were people of color and then there was the mixed race, mixed heritage was different. And so they were repeating or saying things that they were taught or was okay in their family. So we helped shift some of that narrative, I think, in some ways, because I already knew I was working hard. So I was a good student, decent athlete.
Right.
I knew I had to be better. I used it as I'm going to prove you wrong. And I had some friends that would, sometimes fight my battles at the lunch table, or I would usually just leave if a slur came up, if inappropriate comment or joke or anything like that. Just because, one, I'm the one that's driving home later going, oh, I should have said this, But I had some friends that are a lot quicker on the draw than I was on that kind of thing.
See, I needed a friend like you growing up because I was the guy that didn't ask to repeat. It just heard one thing. I could have been mistaken what I've heard, but I would react, and my mom would have to leave work a lot to come, address my behavior and my actions. So, Mom, I'm sorry.
Yeah. I think I've made up for it since then. I have to work on that sometimes, that defensiveness, that reaction now.
But it sounds like even from a younger age, you were a change agent because you said something along the lines that you would help change the narrative or change, what people have been taught or what they had heard or what they were repeating and kind of helped change that narrative.
Yeah. I think that I hadn't thought of it exactly in that term until we were talking right now, but, I just wanted to prove them wrong. I wanted to prove that, I was just as good, if not better or whatever, and that I could, do well. So, trying to keep it manageable so it wasn't a chip on my shoulders type of thing, but, voted most likely to succeed by my peers. Nobody was surprised that I went off away to school, scholarship, those kinds of things. And that I'm doing well, relatively well now.
Oh, you are. You are. So how was the transition to Lubbock?
Oh, gosh. A little scary at first, I thought, okay, a little homesick, but, I remember my mom, did you know you can pack food with dry ice and get some of your home cooked meals that way? And that's when I learned too, Thanksgiving was a new favorite holiday because you get all the home cooking. I didn't gain weight. I actually lost weight because I missed home cooking. Lots of cereal in the dorms. But, I found my way. I joined a co-ed business fraternity, Alpha Kappa Psi. And
I'm in Alpha Kappa Psi.
See?
Yeah.
I don't hardly ever talk.
You know about the Brooklyn Four.
Oh, my gosh. I haven't even thought about that in years. But I joined that in a sophomore year and met some great people. And it was a good organization for me. It was diverse and then just business interests. And, of course, there's some things that we would go through as pledges and things that I'm like, what does this have to do with anything? Figured out later, like the transition and how it can translate to real life lessons and pressure. Right. But, I still have some friends that I even keep in touch with from that. Enjoyed Lubbock, loved being able to get around town and, have that college experience, but not get in too much trouble. Right.
And so when you went to college, I know you mentioned, your parents, you all talked business growing up. And so you knew you was going to go off and major in business, but did you know which direction, which path you wanted to go in?
I was pretty sure it was going to be marketing. Finance and accounting were fine. Statistics is my nemesis. But I really enjoyed marketing, the management, consumer behavior, all those organizational behavior. And so I think, that played a role. And I knew, pretty much any organization I'd be able to transfer those skills, especially with those basics. And fell into retail partly because I was wanting a job that I could work in Lubbock and then go back and forth at home. So I worked for Target in Lubbock and then here in Fort Worth and back and forth and applied to go into their kind of management training program and leadership. But because I was an August graduate, they wanted me to apply as an internal candidate. And so the cycles were a little off versus H-E-B Grocery, who I went with. I did an internship with them my junior year and then, or between my junior and senior year, and then was able to apply again. And so I did their program. Still some of the best, training and development opportunity, and then really set the stage for a lot of things I did since then.
It's funny you mentioned that. So I went to Baylor, Stickham Bears. In the business school, HEB does I'm sure they probably do at the tech, the marketing plan. And so it was one of my, probably favorite moments of going through the business school was doing their initiative, not knowing at the point that they're actually recruiting, trying to recruit, who they're, looking to put in their leadership program and things like that. But it's funny that we kind of have very similar business school tracks and, here we are. And so, you're entering the professional world, I'm going to say the young lady and you have the world figured out at this point, right? Because you stuck to your plan. I'm going to go to tech, going to do a business major, get a job. Yeah. This thing called life is easy.
Oh, yeah, sure. So, I knew I didn't necessarily want a desk job right away and didn't want to be. So that's why HB was so good because, going to the School of Retail Leadership, I started out in a store in Waxahachie, Texas. So I'd interned in Cleburne. And then I did my first placement in Waxahachie. And bounced between that store and the store in Ennis during my rotation program. So, running a produce department, running the drugstore department, the front end, the customer service, So I will say when I met my husband, I thought, okay, I'm ready to make this pivot because for me to continue growing and advancing with the company, I'd have to be ready to start moving. Right. He worked for the post office at the time. And even though you can transfer, you start all over. Your seniority is location-based. Right. So that kind of was a shift. And I thought, well, if I want to stay with this guy, work. So that's when I decided to go back to school, got my MBA, pivot to get to the other side of corporate. But, no, I didn't have it all figured out. I've told a lot of people that, look, I don't have a 5-year plan. I've always tried to be open to the opportunities and kind of a general direction, but not be so structured or right. focused that I don't pay attention to opportunities that almost, knock.
I'm not saying I coined this phrase, but I always say organized chaos. It's like, I have a general path, but how I may get there might right. be, the traditional way, but I know where I want to go.
Yeah.
You mentioned something very early on, and I'm curious to hear the story. You said you met your husband on a blind date.
Oh, yeah.
Usually blind dates don't lead to marriages for, 20 years now or
21, yeah.
Yeah, so I'm sorry I bet your story.
No problem. Definitely my partner in crime, in all things. He and I, so my cousin by marriage, Diana, and her husband David knew both of us. And I say cousin by marriage because Diana's mom married my uncle.
Gotcha.
And so it was second marriage, kind of thing. And so unfortunately my uncle had passed, and the guy I was dating was a jerk and stood me up. And I was just like, I'm 24-ish, 24. And I'm like, I'm not looking for Mr. Right, but just, somebody would be around for a while and not be a jerk.
So be consistent.
And I was not doing a very good job picking them. So the joke was that with David and Diana was that David only had one guy friend, and it was Chris. And so, we did back then, it was still, early 2000, so it was 2001. So it was, paper picture swapping and I'll meet her. And so, and vice versa. So we had already been talking about when they would set up for us to meet. And as it turned out, it was my aunt's birthday. It was the first birthday after my uncle had passed.
Gotcha.
That we were all rallying around at her house. And so my husband came to meet me there. And I was supposed to go to the party and then meet some girlfriends for dinner and a movie. And that didn't happen because he came and then they came over. And so he met half my family that same night as he met me. And in fact, had one of my friends on the way as they were walking out to their cars, and I walked them out, so we could talk. And she said, well, what do you think? And I said, well, he's nice, it's hard to, everybody, we're in a fishbowl kind of sense. She goes, well, if you're not interested, let me know. And I was like, whoa. First dibs. So
you got first round refusal.
It moved pretty quick though. And my mom had always said, you just know. And I wasn't looking for the one, but he ended up being the one. And I did know. And my family was going on a trip. And I asked my parents, hey, it was you could get crazy, low fares to Europe. So we were going, this was January when I met him. So we were going to go in March. And I said, can I invite a friend? And so I invited him. And so we've been together. I known him for 10 days when I invited him. And when we actually went on the trip to Italy with my parents and another friend from college and his friend, we'd been together 6 weeks. But I already we both kind of knew this was it. Yeah.
This is it.
Yeah.
So that is pretty fast. 10 days and, hey, do you want to go to Europe with me? What was his response?
He was like, yeah. Because he wanted a girl, someone who wanted to travel, and he wanted to go see and do things. And so, his parents freaked out a little bit. Or his mom, I think. But
it's something about that story. It's when you know, but also when you're with a person that you're equally yoked and kind of aligned with, why waste time?
My grandma met him, and she met a couple guys along the way, and she said, you met your match, which basically meant he could go toe to toe with me. And he, can. He says, we're yin and yang to each other. Some things we have nothing in common with whatsoever, and then a lot of other things we do, of course. So
I always say that me and Jordan, we're so different that we're so much alike.
Yeah.
Our differences is what balances out, but then, we're so aligned in so many things. So, so you get it and understand
I totally get it. Totally get it.
And so now with your, Bonnie and Clyde, you have your partner in tow. Now you're doing your MBA. Mm-hmm. What's next for you at this point, at this juncture?
So that's when I, made the pivot to Radio Shack. At the time I had been doing the landscape analysis. Okay, we had Bombay Company, Pier 1, Radio Shack, just locally, let alone then Container Store, JCPenney. Retail was doing okay. and so used the opportunity to pivot and get on the corporate side. So TCU alums, MBA alums were really good for me for quite a long time until I made the pivot to nonprofit. So really it was just a great opportunity to work for a Fortune 500 company downtown. It was the old, towers.
Right.
That then turned into, great campus and stuff, corporate buildings and whatnot. But then they built a new campus, so I got to see that and be part of being a new office and space and, go from the offices to the open concept. And then we had some, leadership challenges. So it definitely felt like, I told people I felt like I was living in a business case during the time that I was there, because I saw the CEO transitions and leadership shifts and communication challenges. And like I said, that's when I figured out I needed to not only be mentally stimulated by my work, but also have connection with it emotionally, have a heart for it. So I reached out again to the network of TCU alums and started networking a little more actively. I'm definitely somebody that believes in networking all the time and, building those relationships. But that's how I ended up at the Health Science Center. New university president, had been there about 6 months. So I was part of the new regime and excitement around all of that, and didn't realize I was actually part of someone's succession plan. So I came in as an administrative director to work on their research centers and institutes, and then shifted into an acting role as acting chief of staff and doing my old job too. So that was a busy, busy time. And had a big life curveball at the time. My dad was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer.
Oh, wow.
And so right the same month that I became acting chief of staff. So all of that is going on all at the same time. But I think, I was put there for the reason and for the time, because the people I worked with, my colleagues and everything, that's what helped us get him to MD Anderson. And so that's why he is a walking miracle, because 14 years later, he's still with us.
And I say this with one first, glad that your dad is still, because that's not everyone's story with pancreatic cancer. It's sometimes coined as just win.
Yeah, exactly. And it's especially special to me because I was born on his birthday. So I am his 30th birthday present that keeps on giving, as I say. And, so you can imagine, we drive each other crazy, but we also have a really tight bond. So, being able to help be his patient advocate while my mom could then be, his spouse and handle those kinds of things. And we work together in that sense. I have no doubt that that's part of why he's still here with us. So, treatment and everything. So, knock on wood, we've had a lot of great memories still together. And so
we'll continue to still have memories.
Yeah. So, but we try not to take it for granted. But.
So, doing the UNT Health Science Center, at what point did you feel the need to be connected to community?
Oh, gosh. So I grew up with a family that, we were always good neighbors, helped people out. Service wasn't formal, like board service or, sign up to volunteer, but it was just be good neighbors, be good citizens. And so when I finished the MBA program, I was like, I have all this free time. What am I going to do? And I wanted to give back. So I started with the Hispanic Women's Network and mentoring and getting involved with high school Latina girls, because I felt this sense of duty and obligation that, too much is given, much is expected. And I want to give back in that way. I know I've been, even despite challenges or hurdles along my path, it doesn't compare to so many people's. And so I want to be able to make it easier for anyone else I can. And so that volunteering started that, and then going through Leadership Fort Worth and working at the Health Science Center, being around, people are doing amazing work in the classroom, training the future providers or researchers or scientists or community leaders in that sense, was so inspiring too. And so, feeling like I want to do my part.
All right. Well, I would just want to give a shout out to the Hispanic Women's Network. You all have some dynamic women who either are part of it, been a part of it, from yourself, Roxanne Martinez, Annette Landeros, Rosa Navajar. Yeah. The list can continue to go on. And so anytime I hear about the Hispanic Women's Network and, I'm like, sheesh, that's, it's the who's who of Fort Worth, Tarrant County.
Yeah. I think it's a great organization. I tell people all the time, it's good to take your skills there and put it to good use, but also to learn and practice and do things that you can then take to your, professionally and in the community too.
Gotcha. And so, with that sense of, community and wanting to give back and, you decided to, I think I'll run for public office. How did that decision come about?
Oh, gosh. I think as I got more and more active, so after Leadership Fort Worth, and my first board was the Arts Council Board of Directors, and the Health Science Center kind of supported that participation and, involvement in the community, and just starting to be more and more involved. One of those things, that old saying, how do you get something done? Ask a busy person. And I kind of started being that, and I asked questions. I built relationships with people like Rosa, or former Councilman Sal Espino was, in my neighborhood. And so he's the first elected official that I knew personally and could call or text or email or, what have you. And so, he started too by asking me multiple times to be on a board or commission. And I finally said yes to the Library Advisory Board during a time when funding was tough. People were questioning the validity of libraries and the relevancy. And so kind of sparking some of that advocacy work. But then just getting more and more involved and seeing that my business expertise and background and my service background was a benefit. And then honestly, people started asking. They said, would you ever run for office? And I used to say, no, I work for state agency, da-da-da-da-da. And then it's just over time, I was like, well, I talked to these young ladies about their dreams and, opportunities. And, when people see things in you that maybe you don't see in yourself, how you need to maybe stop and listen. And so I took stock of that and said, if not me, then who? And if not now, then when? And so I started changing the response to, I'm not sure. I'm sure it's not if, it's when. And so, floating that out there and then finally deciding, strategically looking at the particular race for Council District 2 at the time, the 2015 results was really close, less than 30 votes. Right. So again, every vote counts, right? 30 votes was less than 30 votes made the decision on who was winning that seat. And so, launched my campaign, launched early, a little bit of tests involved and strategy, knowing that I probably wasn't like the heir apparent or, the one that was going to be, endorsed by a bunch of folks. But I held my own enough to force a runoff and ran the campaign in a way that I knew I wanted to still live and work in Fort Worth and make a difference. So, I didn't have to hang my head. There was nothing that me or my team did that I'm ashamed of or embarrassed by. And a lot of people even complimented how quick I bounced back because I took about a month off from everything. My husband's like, are you going to go back to work? Because I was just chilling. I was on the porch a lot. I was, just relaxing and really kind of unwinding and decompressing from the campaign, but also busy 10 years at the Health Science Center. And then I did consulting work for about a year to kind of balance and figure out what I wanted to do. And then the opportunity, which I'd already been talking about, joining a nonprofit and combining my passion and my purpose kind of thing. So that's how I ended up at Girls Inc. and reaching out and saying, let's have coffee, because several people sent me the job posting, and there you go. Gotcha.
And so, I know you mentioned a lot of people kind of approached you about running for office. Is it something that you early on ever had an interest in? Or
gosh, no.
Because statistically speaking, and I don't know this actually if it's a real statistic, being a valedictorian, a lot of politicians, elected officials were their class valedictorians, student body presidents. And so there might have been, a natural correlation there. But
well, now that you say that, I do remember back in high school, I ran for class office and I couldn't get elected. And, it was the cheerleaders or the jocks or, more stereotypical kind of folks. And some of my friends said, look, Jennifer, that's more of like the popularity stuff. You should run for student government, student body government, because those are the people that are actually like dealing with administrators and pushing for changes and all that. So I ran for vice president and got that.
Gotcha.
So to your point, I guess I should have put that together, but I didn't think about it till you just brought it up.
we all relive our high school days, right?
Yeah.
I have to live and work with a person who beat me for student body president every day, Turner Thornton. If you're watching this, I have not forgiven you, even though we're partners together. I still have not forgiven you.
There you
go. But
yeah.
it's
competition's good, right?
Yeah, competition's good. Competition's good. And so, you had that experience. What did you learn, not about your campaign, but what did you learn about yourself after running for public office?
I figured out that I was, tougher than I thought. Got the chance to meet some amazing people that I would not have otherwise met. Got to really get to know my city and the district in a way that I wouldn't have otherwise, again, had the opportunity to do so if I hadn't jumped into that pool and that pond. I also learned even more about like how much people are watching you when you don't think they're watching. From those that talked to me during the race, after the race, the people that got involved that didn't know me and what that leap of faith looked like for them, as well as those that, were maybe quietly supporting behind the scenes or actively supporting on the front lines with me. And, just learning that just a reinforcement of my values, I think, and who I am as a person and the kind of leader I want to be. And what I want to get done for the community, whether it's in a policymaking role or it's in a role like I have now where I get to help influence and shape and expose and hopefully help get people to think a little differently or add to their perspective as they move forward.
And so, I do a little bit of research before I invite my guest on and, to take what you've talked about from what you've learned about yourself running for office, but just that general experience. I saw and read an article that you participated in the Fort Worth Way conversation.
Right.
One, can you explain to the audience what the Fort Worth Way is or what it's deemed to the public eyes? But did you experience that or see that on the campaign trail? Oh, yeah.
So in general, the Fort Worth Way was originally, I think, coined by maybe Mayor Moncrief back in the day. But, as a thought and a process of how Fort Worth does politics or handles public disagreements compared to, say, our neighbors to the east, being more public or rowdy or controversial. So we try to do things a little more quietly, a little bit more maybe orchestrated behind the scenes. There's some, key decision makers that kind of drive who gets to do what type of thing or where resources go and that kind of thing. So that's kind of the thought process around the Fort Worth Way. So some people think of it very positively, especially if they benefited from it. And I'm not saying I haven't. But then there's others that say, they've never had a seat at the table or even an opportunity, a voice. So I think that, that conversation we had, it was a panel discussion that the Fort Worth Report did. And some people that when they saw I was signed up to do it, they said, "Are you crazy? Why are you going to subject yourself?" I said, "No, this will be a good discussion. And I think I have good experience to share, different perspective, viewpoint. I'm not trying to represent all Hispanics or all biracial people or all 40-somethings or anything like that, or all women. I'm just trying to share a perspective, my lived experience and whatnot." So, yeah, I think the fact that there's some people who, how they picked who they were going to support for District 2 before even maybe having a conversation with me, so some of those pre-made decisions, right. And some of that's just politics, right. But some of that is, I think, too, the Fort Worth Way.
Do you feel like the Fort Worth Way, if you will, is a barrier for, people who have an interest in not only serving, but also leading?
I do, because I think what I've seen, kind of back to what I was saying about in high school, there is, and there's growing shift, but especially I would say mid-2000s, early 2000s in Fort Worth, there was still a lot of tokenism, so, and I've tried to take this approach when people ask me to serve on a board or serve on a committee or whatnot. Oftentimes I know they're looking for a woman, they're looking for a woman of color, Latina, and so rather than me saying yes to everything because there's just not enough days and time and all that, is who else can I recommend?
Right.
But I'm also careful about that because I don't want it to be where I'm subjecting someone to be a token. and that's just checking the box versus they're going to have a true voice. This organization or entity wants that perspective and is trying to build that relationship intentionally and not transactionally. And I think Fort Worth is still working through that intention versus transaction.
Do you think it's not a lack of not being intentional, but more comfort into, hey, let's go to Jennifer or let's go to
the known commodities, right?
Rather lifting someone else up and trying to see.
We're very relational in Fort Worth, and that can be a good thing and a bad thing, right? Like, oh, I know I can call, or if I need this question, like, let me text so-and-so. But at the same time, we can be in our own little bubble or a vacuum, and we all have bias, right? So we just did an exercise with our board and staff at Leadership Fort Worth that was interesting, and I've tried to be mindful of both my professional circle and my personal circle. My family is definitely a very diverse circle, race, ethnicity, LGBTQ+, as well as viewpoints and perspectives in politics, which we have to be careful about. But just taking stock of that, and I think so many people in Fort Worth maybe don't think about that. And so I think you really do. It's human nature, like attracts like. And so if we're not intentionally putting ourselves out there and kind of exercising that muscle to be uncomfortable, be in situations that we're not the majority, that we're open to other perspectives and lived experiences and understanding why somebody thinks the way they do or what their upbringing, how they've gotten to where they are, I think that makes such a big difference. And so I think Fort Worth's definitely come a long way, and especially in the last couple of years. I think, 2020 to now, I think society as a whole, and especially in Fort Worth, I think we're seeing some nice leaps. There's still lots of challenges, but some big shifts, I think, that are starting to happen.
No, I agree with you. And I hate to use this as a reference, and it's not to pick sides, politics, who's wrong or who's right. But I truly feel like the George Floyd incident made everyone kind of like come to the table and say, we have to do something.
Enough is enough.
Enough is enough. It wasn't about who was right, who was wrong, Democrat, Republican, left, right, or whatever. I think that moment in time in our history really defined us. And I feel like it kind of brought us together as a community, at least here in Fort Worth. I felt like that because you saw people from all different perspectives. Like, we need to have a conversation. We need to, be more intentional about how we're going to move forward.
Right. I think so too. Between George Floyd being killed and then the pandemic, the disparities, I think that also were highlighted about whether it's Wi-Fi access in homes and students, food insecurity, economic insecurity, health disparities from, access and day-to-day. I mean, so many things that I think that's what sped up some more of this desire for societal changes and our community, and understanding that if everybody is better off in our community, everybody's better off in our community kind of thing. So I think we've definitely made some strides there, and we're, Leadership Forward trying to be part of that conversation. And, I'm blessed to work with Sarah Fairley Luna is our program director, and she has a really unique background in both having a social work background as well as a master's degree in conflict transformation and peace building. So she'll tell you she loves conflict. But she likes to get people in. She can be uncomfortable and let it be there and really help bring people together and create those spaces where we can have those conversations. And like I tell my board, if we can't have tough conversations in Leadership Fort Worth where we build community with these cohorts over time and in different spaces and places and topics, then where else can we have it? So my hope is what we do here can translate out into the community.
As a proud alum, leadership class 2019, I enjoyed and really loved my experience in Leadership Fort Worth. And so you get a front row seat now with Leadership Fort Worth. What does our future leaders look like from the pipeline?
Definitely more diverse. We have attracted more diverse candidates from all different aspects in the last couple cohorts. And, I'm proud of that from reputationally speaking, living and working in Fort Worth for 20 something years. I don't take for granted that part of that is because we've had participants say, I want to do it because you're leading the organization now, or what we're seeing y'all doing, where you're, incorporating, from intentionality of our vendors, who we're partnering with, organizations we're with, speakers we bring in, the materials we use, all those kinds of things, so that we really are walking the talk. Because that was something, our organization issued a statement prior to me, just like many others, about George Floyd and the DEI committee and doing some new efforts. And I'm the one that's been pushing, okay, but how do we make sure it's not just a statement? It's not just a committee. What does that look like? So we're really pushing to make our cohorts look like Fort Worth. Right. And so we're not there yet, but we've definitely made some strides and, have some great momentum and energy as we go into our 50th anniversary. We're celebrating in 2 weeks from today, which is exciting. Hard to believe it's already here in some ways, but excited to have it come to fruition.
And so you say that, 50 years, first, congratulations.
Thank you.
But you're the third executive director in the 50-year history.
Wow. It's kind of crazy.
Love Harriet. But how was that stepping into, something that's been built up, has a reputation, but it also has, the institutional knowledge in Harriet, but also her presence. And so how do you make it your own leadership Fort Worth from your lens and how you want to see the organization go for the next 50?
So I think it's been, a journey and a learning process. As the board even told me recently, I inherited a really unique set of circumstances when I stepped into this role in January of 2021. We were still in the midst of the pandemic. Following a longtime leader, we did some transition work, but, there's so much institutional knowledge. There's things she will forget more about leadership Fort Worth than I'll probably learn and absorb. So there's a lot of feeling sometimes of a stops and starts because, I don't know what I don't know or why we do certain things or why, but also still the opportunity, which is exciting, to make a difference. So bringing some of my background around, process improvement, my strengths are, and taking something and taking things to the next level. I'm not necessarily your entrepreneur start from the scratch, but definitely good at taking organizations or entities or projects and moving them up to the next level. So I'm excited in that, and trying to be balanced with my desire for change and enhancement, but also being respectful and honoring our past, so that's always a juggle. I think that's where being in politics and being a former candidate, and former chief of staff, where I had a lot of lead through influence versus authority practice that comes into play in this kind of situation where we're very diverse. I have alum from 1970s that are still involved and engaged, past board presidents that we meet with once a year, to alums that just graduated, 2 weeks ago, right? So, and everything in between from an aged background. So trying to meet their needs where they are, offer diverse activities and programming for alums to keep them engaged and, keep everybody, it's a lot. It's a tall order. But we focus first on the programs and making sure those, going from a virtual cohort and getting them all back up and running in person, and then staffing changes as attrition and other things have happened over the time. And just trying to keep raising the bar. That was our theme internally last year, was raising the bar. Okay. And then this year, it's really focused around the 50th. So we're going to take that all the way. Even though our fiscal year ends in June, we're going to take it all the way through the calendar year.
As you should. Yeah. As you should. And so, as executive director of Leadership Fort Worth, you are uniquely situated to where you get to see not only the current business leaders in our community, but you get to see the up and coming young professionals and even down to the kids. Right. And so where we are at in Fort Worth, are you hopeful for what our future is, or are you kind of discouraged?
No, I'm hopeful. Sometimes things like the recent elections and voter turnout are disheartening. Some of even the local, the national politics that play out locally is disheartening. Some of the common sense things that we can't seem to get done downtown or at City Hall or in Austin is disheartening. But having conversations and seeing the progression of these cohorts, because I attend every session. I've yet to miss a session, thankfully. come late to a couple, had to leave early from a couple, but I've been in all of them. And because to me, that is, the best place to be in so many of our days, our program days, to see the leaders in action, to hear their discussion. I learn all the time, and it's helping to shape what we talk about and where we go, and, making sure that we're helping meet the leaders where they are now. Not when I went through in 2009 or you went through in 2019, because the world's changed so much since then. It's more about now and in the future. So very optimistic. I think, just as we're seeing generations in the workforce, we're seeing that with our programs and our cohorts and the mindset and the perceptions and things that they're talking about, things that are important to them. And then just the fact, too, the number of people that weren't born and raised here. And so getting them kind of up to speed on Fort Worth and what they know about Fort Worth from a past, current, and future aspect is pretty exciting.
Gotcha. And, I wanted to ask, because I read another article. You got a lot of articles, so I have a lot of options to read with. And so, you're not shy about being prideful about your Hispanic heritage and being a Latina woman. And so, read the article about Latina women and being elected. And so, do you feel like there is a void in not only Hispanic leadership within Fort Worth, but Hispanic women?
I don't think there's necessarily a void, because we talked about Hispanic Women's Network and the training ground, the caliber of talent and leaders that have come through that organization and continue to be involved. What I think is there's still been, barriers and hurdles from a access opportunity being asked. Women in general have to be asked like 7 times to run for office versus men. They're male counterparts.
I mean, we have to ask women 7 times, what do you want to eat for dinner? So,
sometimes that's fair. I tell my husband it's because I've made so many decisions all day. I don't want to make any more. So usually I just tell him what I don't want to eat, and he can go from there. But, I think in Fort Worth, it's still... there's so many opportunities. The fact that it was 2021 and I was the first person of color to lead Leadership Fort Worth, because we had 2 executive directors that were great, but long term. So, that doesn't leave an opportunity. The fact that we as a board and the organization even has had 1 Latina board president, 1 Latino board president, and no Black or African American leaders, male or female, as board president. And it's 2023 is an interesting thing. So I think, Fort Worth, we talk about diversity a lot, but I think kind of like we were saying about 2020 and George Floyd, but we haven't put our money where our mouth is. Right. I think that comes at the top from most organizations. The leadership has to say, no, I demand diverse slates for candidates, for jobs, for opportunities, for boards. All in nonprofit circles, you're seeing it even more so. If the people you're serving are diverse, but the board isn't, there's a disconnect, because oftentimes lived experience, background, education, there's a disconnect. And so I think organizations have to work harder, longer, build those relationships. It can't be transactional, because let's be honest, you can sniff that out usually. Right. You can kind of this is performative, this is just to check the box diversity kind of thing, versus no, this is intentional, trying to do better. My thoughts, experience, opinion, my voice has just as much weight as, so-and-so next to me.
And so, I know that you have all the solutions to solve the world's problems. How do we get people engaged and want them to be, not only have their voices heard, but, their presence?
I definitely think it's tough. I mean, you have to role model it. I try to, be educated and help people with that. I don't watch every city council meeting or zoning commission meeting anymore, city planning commission. But I think having an awareness, that's why I think like organizations like Fort Worth Report that cover those kinds of things, where you can get a snapshot and you can have a better pulse of it, figure out whatever your news source is from that standpoint. But, as I tell people, it's so hard. There's so much going on to keep up. So it's a full-time job in and of itself, but I think it's part of like our civic duty, right? Like just like voting, you think about anytime I have ever been like, I don't want to research this candidate or, whatever. I think about women and girls in other countries that can't vote and what they would do, how long they would wait in line to vote. And it gives me some guilt. So if I can't, take a break and, maybe not do something else, TV, Netflix, whatever, and do my part, then shame on me, right? And so I think role modeling that, but also like I'm still open. I have folks all the time ask me, like, who do you know? What do you know about this race? Who do you know about these candidates? Where should I, look for resources? I put stuff on my social media and try and encourage that and be that facilitator. Because I think it's important to just role model that. And I think continue to educate. I tell people all the time, we pay attention to national and Austin, but city, county, school, like that's where it's at. That's what's making decisions day in, day out.
Directly impacts your life more than anywhere else.
And that's also why, I tell people we have to be mindful. Not everybody has opportunity or has a job where they can go downtown City Hall like I did and be on the zoning commission and spend half a day once a month doing that. Right. So we have to also recognize meeting people where they are. If they're busy working, kids in school, extracurricular, like when are they going to have time to report that pothole? Right. When are they going to have time to report that purple light that we should maybe just have an inventory of across the city, or those kinds of things that's somebody's job that they audit at night.
Right.
So I think it's that balance. Like, let's use some common sense and be practical about what, normal people's day-to-day, 9 to 5 or whatever that, if it's second shift, third, whatever shift. And then, back to something you said way back, maybe in our offline discussion, thinking back to not just what benefits you, but what's going to benefit your neighbors. And I'm talking your neighbors down the street, across the city, different zip codes, different council district, whatever, really thinking, and that's what we talk about at Leadership Forward, right? Community trusteeship, making decisions that are going to benefit more than not, and definitely not hurt anyone in the process. So I think that's some of the key to our future success.
I think that's good. 40 years from now.
Oh, gosh.
And you have 10 years away from the 100-year celebration of Leadership Forward, you finally decide to retire.
Oh, my gosh.
And we're at this big, elaborate retirement party for Jennifer Trevino.
Oh, gosh.
How do you want people to remember you by?
Ooh, pretty simple, I hope, that I helped in some way, that I left things better than they were, helped them either personally, professionally, family, community, just that I didn't just take up space, that I made the best of my opportunities, the resources I had. I'm not looking for awards and flashy stuff. Just, was it a life well spent?
That's good. Well, Jennifer, I thank you truly for joining me on Take This Down. It's been an honor and a privilege, and I just wanted to let you know whatever I can do to assist you, whether that's helping recruiting for Leadership Fort Worth, trying to get my wife in this year.
Yes,
so I hope she gets accepted.
Yes.
But helping, I think the word that you use is mentoring our community on making sure that they are not only good neighbors, but they're engaged. I'm here for you, but thank you again for this opportunity.
I appreciate it. Applications for Leadership Class 2024 are available online and not due until June 30th.
Okay. You hear that? So apply, get your applications in, and it's a great program, I can tell you that. So
thanks, Ty.
Thank you again. Thank you for watching this episode of Take This Down. We had a great conversation with Jennifer. We got to learn about her upbringing growing up in Joshua, Texas, where she was valedictorian, to her days at Texas Tech, where ultimately led her to Executive Director of Leadership Fort Worth. If you missed any previous episodes, be sure to go back and check them out. Thank you again.